Vancouver UFO. Today is June 6, 2022, and today we have author experiencer Suzy Hansen. We are very excited to have her, and today she'll be presenting on spirituality and the ET human soul connection. So welcome, Suzy. Thank you for coming all the way from New Zealand today. That's fantastic.
Thank you, Jeff. You're welcome. I can't see you all at the moment. I can only see my PowerPoint. So thank you all for attending. Okay, so that is my book, The Dual Soul Connection, The Alien Agenda for Human Advancement. And I wrote that about 6 years ago now. I'm surprised actually how many people are writing to me. There's actually been a huge upswing in people writing to me about my book. I've always had a lot of people communicating with me and asking me questions, but this has increased as things in the world have changed. And I think that people have seen some of the things that I talk about in the book have actually now taken place, and more will likely take place as time goes by. So Dr. Rudy Schild, who's an emeritus astrophysicist at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, contributed to my book. I saw him presenting on YouTube some years ago and felt as if I knew him and needed to contact him. So it took me quite some time to be able to do that. And I wrote him a letter thinking that he probably would be so busy that he wouldn't respond, but he did. And he asked to see some chapters from my book, and he felt that he understood them in terms of physics, and read my whole manuscript and offered to make scientific comments, commentary, footnotes, and a scientist's epilogue for the book, which was very good of him. And it gave me a lot of confidence in my experiences, because very often when experiencers are talking about what they have encountered and what things that they've done on craft, it can sound like sci-fi to many people. And you're always aware that that might be rumbling around in people's minds when you're speaking. So this was very good that he understood a lot of the physics involved and said that this is actually a good material. So I was very grateful for that. Okay, so here's the title page for today, Spirituality and the ET Human Soul Connection. I'm going to talk about some of the factors that I've put there, and there's several of you, I think, who attended yesterday, so you'll be getting pretty much the same as yesterday, and I'll try to throw a few new things in. But we're going to cover soul origin, complex multi-layered education programs. These are for humans to help us to evolve. The alien agenda, what the broader, wider agenda is that all of these things are involved in. The dual soul connection, what is that? The three waves, what are they? And human advancement and evolution. So let's start with soul origin, pathway to a new life. And I'll start with this quote from C.S. Lewis: "You don't have a soul, you are a soul. You have a body." We often say we have a soul, but we actually are the soul, and we're just wearing this body for this life. And that soul will leave in the end and go back to what Dr. Schild calls the great field of consciousness, where it will reside until it's ready for its next round of life. So this is a drawing my husband did some years ago for me, depicting what I recalled in like a flashback or an intense, well, some experiencers would call it a memory bomb opening. And in this vision-like memory I had, I was a soul, that's me, the pinky purple one down the bottom, and I was with another soul, that's the blue ball of light. And we were in front of what seemed like a panel or a committee, if you want to put it that way, and it seemed rather like a job interview. And that these were wise souls, and I've called them the universal governing body of this planet, who oversee the incarnation of into life on this planet. And I was told later on by the Greys that this happens on every life form, every planet in existence, that there is this governing body that oversees the souls incarnating into the life forms. So that's a very deep and interesting and broad comment or observation. Anyway, I was floating in front of them, and some discussion was taking place as to whether I was going to be suitable to accept a particular life to incarnate into. And the blue ball of light seemed much wiser than me and seemed to be assisting me in some way. So what was discussed was that I had awoken in the field of consciousness. So felt a tingling, felt a desire to move, to motivate, to create some movement towards a life. And as soon as this feeling occurred, I was presented with two particular lives. One was the life that I'm leading now as Suzy Hansen, and one was as a human, and one was as a sponge-like form on a newly developing planet. Both of them were involved the same amount of commitment or the same amount of work in respect to a long and difficult life. So once I'd made a decision as to which of these lives I preferred, because I was able to actually look into each life and see snippets in my consciousness of what that life involved, and I chose this one. Once I'd made that decision, then I set about splitting off from my consciousness. If I can describe my consciousness as a ball of light or a large spark of light, and I began examining the many, many lives that we have all led, that I have led, and deciding what I needed to take in terms of wisdom or knowledge from my soul source to go into that life. And once I'd made those decisions, I divided off. And that piece that had divided off became a soul, like an electric ball of light. So this brings into question what happens to the rest of the soul source that remains in that state of consciousness. Now, as each of us incarnate into a life, we go through different steps, interim steps. And one of the first interim steps, once we've made a decision on whether we're going to go into a life or selecting a life, is that our frequency attracts other souls and individual groups of souls that may assist us or be part of our life in some way, connected in some way for learning, the purpose of learning and evolving. That doesn't mean to say that they were necessarily a family member, but there are many things that occur in our lives where we cross paths with people and things happen. And so I'm assuming that those souls were attracted to that vibe that I was creating with my soul. The next step is that you confer with the universal governing body about your spiritual tasks and what you're going to do on the planet during this time. Then is the second interim step, which is connecting with other souls. And these are the souls that are most likely to be involved in your life in a very intimate or particular or specific way. But for those who I'm talking about today, those who belong to this agenda, those who belong to what I would describe as the three waves, there is a slightly different second interim step that's sitting there in blue text. And that is you connect with other souls and with another species. So once I had made certain decisions to do with souls or attracted souls, I then found myself on board a craft just almost instantly with this other species around me. Now I recognized this other species and I knew that I'd led a life as one of them. So therefore, that would have been part of the wisdom or knowledge that I had taken with me from that soul source that would assist me. The next step is soul enhancement and education for people in this blue text group who are working in this agenda that I'm describing today. And that is that you remained as a soul on board craft. You learnt a great deal, you were enhanced through frequency, you were educated about what you're going into and the kinds of things that could happen, etc. And and the last step, which I can't see because the text bar's in the way, is that you incarnate into this life, and that's the step that everybody takes. Whoops, I missed that bit. Incarnate, I couldn't see it, with the dual soul. So most souls will incarnate, and the blue bit that's tacked on the end is with the dual soul, and that's many of the people involved in the agenda that I'll describe have this dual soul capacity, which I'll get onto in due course. So factors in this soul's journey through this preparatory stage, there are a lot of terms that come into mind from this experience, and that is, well, reincarnation, of course, our soul frequency, establishing that before we incarnate, splitting or dividing the soul. So what happens to the aspect of the soul that is left behind in the field of consciousness? Life between lives, what do we do during that time? Do we just float in the great sea of souls, or do we undergo other learning at the same time? Multiple or concurrent lives. Do the pieces that we've split off from our soul then incarnate somewhere else? So part of us, our soul source, is working somewhere else in a parallel life. That's something that a lot of people are talking about these days. It also comes into prior agreements and life plans, because this big discussion took place with the UGB before I incarnated. The power of attraction, our frequency attracting other souls that are like-minded or like frequency. The soul intent versus free will. So is our entrance into this life actually free will, or does it rely on a consensus of agreement with this governing body? The universal versus human souls. We often see ourselves as a human soul when in fact we are a universal soul that can go anywhere. And soul evolution. What is our soul going to do? How is this going to enhance our wisdom, and how might we use that in future lives? Okay, so now let's have a look at complex multi-layered education programs to assist humanity. This was explained to me as a child, and we're going to go into that in a little bit of depth. So these education programs on craft for experiencers are very varied, depending on what group you are in, where you've been assigned or where you've volunteered to go, where your soul source has the most experience, perhaps based on previous lives. And the ETs use all kinds of means to educate us through lectures, through testing and assessment, as in the left-hand image there, where I'm undergoing a test on how to use holographic material with a 3D computer, through technology, through teaching us about that, through advancing our telepathy, advanced activities involving consciousness. In one experience I recall on board craft, they were asking us, taken into a special room that Jeff and I both talk about, this white room where disintegration of matter took place, including our bodies, although I didn't do it, or their bodies, etc. So we're learning this advanced states of being that we have not moved towards yet. We learn about the alien culture, we learn about recognizing frequencies, what our life tasks are, and our soul awareness. And all of these images are just images that I use in some of my speeches. Each of them has a great deal of material behind them and information, which of course I'm not able to give you on this day, but it's all in my book. Now, the playroom on board craft was one of the most important places for me as a child. And many experiencers talk about this education in a playroom kind of situation, where they are with other species, mainly greys, but other species and mixtures of greys as well, and human children. And there's always some overseers there. There nearly always are a male energy of greys who are kind of moving around and assisting the activities that are taking place. And there were a lot of things that were learnt which we can't replicate here down on the planet. Like a party trick, you just can't do that because it's a totally different environment here from the very organic sense of being within a consciousness, or what as a child I called the big brain of the craft, which actually is a part of every creature, every entity, every being and human that goes on the craft. You become a part of that and you learn how to use it, manipulate it, and use it to advantage. So it enhances your ability in telepathy, in being able to levitate something, in being able to communicate with other species. And it's just not something that you can do down here. Now, on one particular occasion when I was 8 years old and I was in the playroom, I was asked by one of the senior greys if I would like to go with him to another room and meet another child. And I thought that would be a great idea, so I said yes, and I was taken off down a corridor and into a room where there was nothing, and he told me to be patient and wait. And within a short time, 2 greys came in with this ball of electric blue glowing light between them. And I was told this is a soul, and this is going to be the soul of your future son. When you're older and you grow up, you'll get married, you'll have a child, and this child will be a son. And this soul will inhabit that body. And we want you to get to know this soul for many, many years before he is born, because you're going to have to work together and you will be closely tied telepathically and spiritually and through frequency. And he has an important job to do, and you are going to be his mother, his parent, because that is what is required. And you will need to assist him at certain times as his life tasks develop. So at that point, he put an information transfer into my mind. This was quite massive, and it involved an outline of my tasks as I would grow and become an adult, and the events that were layered in 3 streams. I'm just trying to move this bar out of the way, but I can't see what I've got on my screen. Okay, so it was presented to me in 3 streams. The first was a basic stream that basically was calming my childlike shock and confusion at being told something so unusual, slightly scary and profound as a child. And he said, we want you to be friends. We will observe how you relate to each other, and that would be utilized in the future. So this was just a basic introductory stream. And immediately I was given a much deeper level of information that was embedding specific and detailed data into my consciousness to be revealed in the future, but some of which I was able to register consciously at that time and understand at some level. And during this process, he was able to take my consciousness forward from a childlike understanding to a more mature understanding. Now, don't ask me how they can do that, but that was done to me several times in childhood, and then it was just gently put back. So the understanding was there. He was able to embed information at a certain level, and then he just kind of dumbed me back down to that childhood understanding. I was given a lot of information about the agenda, the 3 waves, the incarnation of souls at 8 years old, which was 1962. So this was quite a profound thing to happen. The volume of information imparted was huge, so he used a calming overlay, bringing my mind back to the present, which was just a basic set of facts regarding meeting a new friend. So once again, he just brought it all back, pushed all of the rest of that information into the subconscious to come out in the future, and just said, you're going to be meeting this new friend, you're meeting this new friend, and you can play together. So that's what happened. He said, you will learn to be friends, you'll be very close, and we'll leave you now to play for a while. And they all exited the room. For a little while, I didn't quite know what to do with this ball of light that just hung there. I did a few silly things that children would do, like on the spongy rubbery floor, I did some cartwheels, and then I sat down because nothing seemed to be happening. And it was when I sat down and stopped that movement and momentum and activity that the ball of light just came down close to my shoulder and began communicating with me. So I was getting not messages, but revelations and understandings and snippets, and able to see into our life together, and knowing that the feeling growing within me that I already knew and loved this soul or the son that was to be. And that was a very strong and powerful emotion. I was then taken back once they came back into the room and said, yes, fine, you relate well, this is going to work. They then took me back to the playroom. And of course, you may have noticed that the blue ball of light was also the blue ball of light in my recollection of coming into this life before incarnation. That blue ball of light that seemed much wiser than me and was assisting me in that incarnation was actually that soul. So we had moved together into the craft, and I had incarnated, and that soul had a long education to go through during that time. I was taken back to the playroom, and I was not allowed, if I can put it that way, or I was prevented from remembering what had just taken place at that time, because I was bubbling over with excitement by then, and I was wanting to tell the other kids, and they just faded it from my memory, so that by the time I got into the room at that point in time on the craft, the memory was more distant, and I was more focused on what was happening there and wanting to take part of it. And if you look into the background, you'll see a grey standing by something that I suppose could look rather like a bassinet. And so that was a lullaby bed, what I nicknamed as a child the lullaby bed, where very small children, toddlers and babies were brought on craft, and their vibration or their frequency was harmonized and calmed and then raised somewhat in order for them to take part in what was happening too, because they would relate to children of other species going over and telepathically communicating to them. So they were becoming very, very comfortable with going on board the craft from this very young age. Okay, so fast forward 20 years to where I am, only weeks away, a couple of months away from giving birth to my first child. And I was taken on board craft and told that there was this merging or soul insertion process that was going to take place. So I lay down on a bed, and the grey gently revealed why I was there on this occasion, that this process would take place and that a consciousness, a soul, is required to inhabit my baby's body. This was very interesting that the soul was moving into the body at such a late stage in the pregnancy. So there's a lot of interesting questions and queries and thoughts about that. But they calmed my body down by slowing my metabolism and my heart rate, my breathing, everything about my metabolism was slowed, so that I became quite cold and very relaxed but cold. And I was told that this was important because otherwise, when that baby entered the body, otherwise there would be a shock to my body. So they were preparing my frequency and my metabolism and physical body for the introduction of the soul. And they told me the soul had been enhanced. It was very advanced in some way, and this had been partially engineered by them because of the duties and tasks that this soul would have in life. And they brought into the room with them a whole lot of young greys who were going to be a part of his team, I guess. So they were going to all be involved, grow with him in his activities on the craft in his childhood. He would have constant contact with a lot of them, probably in that same playroom situation. He would learn with them, and they would work with him right throughout his life. So there was a lot of excitement, and there were lots of thoughts buzzing backwards and forwards in the room, which the senior grey on the left there had to silence while this process took place, because it was kind of disturbing me somewhat. So here we have an illustration of how this agenda starts right from my early childhood, being informed at the age of 8 of what I was a part of, given information about it, which has become very self-evident to me over the years, and then the involvement of that blue ball of light, my son-to-be, who eventually was born and has been with me on the craft many times, and no doubt many times on his own as well. So moving on to this alien agenda and discovering my specific role and discovering this dual soul connection with the Greys, again at the age of 8, and this was only a few months later after that first playroom and meeting the soul of my son event. So once again, I was taken into a room with a Grey and a senior Grey and several other smaller Greys. And I called this entity the grandfather, and he told me he would transfer a book, or in other words, put a large download into my mind, information bomb, which would open one day. But meanwhile, he would help me to momentarily understand the information and meet the souls I'd work with in the future. So all of us have people in our lives who assist us in some way, and they don't have to be people who are with us on a long-term basis, like a family member or a very close friend or a workmate. They can be people who cross our paths, perhaps as a workmate momentarily, or other people who come into our sphere of life for a short time or a longer period, but they have that significant impact on us, or they greatly assist us in some way. And if we all look back on our lives, we can probably isolate people who would fit into that role. So they brought this stream of lights into the room that I knew were souls hanging in the air, all different colors, glittering and glistening. And they told me that these souls, some had already incarnated and were already older than me, and some would not incarnate yet. They would be younger than me, but all of them would be very vital to my work. And there were about 30 of them. And I was a little bit daunted because I was told that I would have to communicate with them or greet them. They wanted me to greet them in some way. And they said that they would leave the room to allow me to do that in my way and in my time. So they left the room, and I didn't really know what to do. I was a little tearful, and these souls began coming in close to me one at a time. And as they came in close to me, they would transmit or transfer some information into my consciousness or my mind that would be registered as some images in my mind, faces, snippets, events, scenes, etc., that I would probably, the hope was that I would recognize that in the future. And there have been people in my life who I have recognized as those souls. That includes Dr. Schild. It includes a number of other people throughout my life, and it also includes my late colleague and dear friend who passed away in 2015, who worked with me in UFOCUS NZ in New Zealand for 20 years and played a huge role in helping me as an air traffic controller and pilot. He was helping me to broaden the awareness of New Zealanders of UFOCUS NZ, and he appeared in a lot of documentaries with our network, and helped to set the scene and the stage for UFO research in New Zealand alongside me. So eventually they came back into the room, the Greys, and the atmosphere when they entered the room changed dramatically. There was this intense wave of energy from them that enveloped me, and I could feel this deep feelings of tenderness and love and devotion from them. Many experiencers describe this overwhelming feeling of love that they get from the ETs at times. On this occasion, they were emitting from their torso this pink light, which was a bit of a shock to me because I hadn't actually seen that in childhood. And I was wearing white pajamas at the time, and I looked down, and coming out of my chest was this same pink glow. And coming from probably their consciousness, because I didn't see their mouths move or open, there was this sound, crystalline sound, that was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. And this was all part of this, it was like a blessing or a specific greeting that they were giving me. And I knew that they were singing to someone inside me. I felt as if I had two heads and two brains. I felt as if they were singing to me and the other brain, and that they were emanating this red glow in order to thank me. And I was reciprocating that spontaneously with this red glow coming out of me. And of course, I got to know eventually that this was this dual soul capacity, this other part of my soul that that was responding to them, not specifically me. So let's look at what this dual soul is that I talk about. And before we go on to that, I'd just like to say that I began talking about this dual soul quite a long time ago. I began talking about my experiences in 1997, but it took some time for me before I sort of had the confidence to bring out this information, because a lot of other experiencers and researchers said to me, this is a step too far, people won't understand this. And, you know, there may be some religious groups who won't be happy about this, and you'll get a lot of antagonism. There has been some of that, but not a lot. But I was surprised when I first began talking about this, how many people contacted me saying, you've actually described exactly what I have felt. And one of the people who immediately contacted me was a researcher in the States called Joe Nyman, who's quite elderly now, has become a good friend of mine. And he sent me documentation of his own, where he had come across this kind of description decades ago as a qualified hypnotherapist in the subject, and a number of people had described this to him. Now, when he first talked about this at a grand meeting of researchers that involved the late Dr. John Mack, he was actually vilified for bringing this information out, and nobody would believe him. But it's interesting to note that a couple of years later, Dr. John Mack actually came out in support of Joe Nyman and said, I didn't really want to say at the time, but I too have come across this in regressions that he did as a psychiatrist, Harvard psychiatrist. He did regressions in the subject, and other people mentioned this duality. They called it duality. But then I came along with a somewhat deeper understanding of what that is and what it entails. So this has been around, but under a different name and with two very well-known researchers. Okay, so what is its connection to the alien agenda? We have to begin first by looking at the intergenerational factor, which most of you will be aware of, because this is talked about quite frequently in the contact field, where abductees and experiencers talk about how there are other generations in their family who've experienced some paranormal or contact type or sighting type incidents. So I'm going to go through this using my own family as an example. So over the years, the Greys have told me that they have in fact looked at 4 main generations. It took them a long time to isolate certain genetic lines, and that they actually have been responsible for some people getting together with specific partners for this genetic reason. And then their relationship or marriage may break up later, it may stay together. But quite often there is this intervention that takes place in order to produce children and offspring of specific qualities and genetics. So the first generation that they studied would have been my grandmother, who had rheumatoid arthritis, as I have, and she ended up incapacitated with amputations, leg amputations, and ended up in bed and for many years. And she would see these balls of light in her room like orbs or souls that would communicate with her, reassure her, comfort her, etc. And she used to say to me, and I never really understood, I didn't think of it in terms of UFOs and ETs, but she would say, "We don't come from here, Suze." She put her arm around me when the rest of the family were not around and say that to me. And so I wish that I could go back in time now and spend time talking to my grandmother in light of what I know and understand now, and see what else she could have told me at that time. But unfortunately, that opportunity is lost. So the second generation would have been my mother, who was a psychic artist, could see and communicate with spirit, and spent many years drawing what souls illustrated to her. They would give her their background, factors about their lives, which she would write down, and then she would have the inspiration to paint images of aspects of their life or images of them. The third generation is me, and I now know I've been a part of complex multi-layered education programs on board craft. Some in this third generation will have dual soul. Some will have had a threefold education on craft. So you're taken on as a soul, you leave your body at night, and that's a very different education to the education you might get as a human when you're taken on board craft. And then if you have the dual soul, the grey identity part of that soul combination may go on board craft as well. So you've got these three educations going on, which are all somehow embedded in your consciousness. So this is very deep, this is very multi-layered, like everything the ETs do, and it's very complex. You may have specific tasks to complete in life that you're aware of, or you may be like many experiencers who contact me and say, oh, there's something I have to do in my life and I don't know what it is. I just wish that it would hurry up and show up. I've got this driving feeling that there's something I have to do. And one of the major things that this third generation have to do eventually is support the fourth generation when they come out and begin to make their moves to change many things in our world. So the fourth generation is my son. He also has had the education programs. Some will have a dual soul. Some will have that same threefold education, but it's much more extensive than my generation. They will have extensive specific tasks in life, very extensive. And some of these fourth generation people will be the parents of hybrid children. Okay, so let's have a look at the dual soul then. I've simplified it right down. So we've got a combination of two things under the dual soul there. You've got left and right, that rectangle. The first one is you bring your individual soul source, which I talked about before, that you split off from your large soul source. You bring that soul source piece into this life, knowledge acquired over many lives. And at some point before you incarnate, that is then combined with an aspect of a grey's intelligence. And throughout my book, I call it the grey intelligence, the grey identity, or the grey consciousness, depending on what I'm talking about. All of those can be interchangeable. I discuss that in my book. So I have seen this take place on board craft where a grey was standing there. He had a soul in front of him, and a little spark, a little piece of light came out of his head and joined onto that. And there was this electric reaction for a minute, and then it all settled down. And so this piece of his knowledge and soul source from a living, breathing grey is joined onto that soul source that is then going to incarnate into a body, a human body. We have very little understanding of the soul. There's oodles of books that have been written about it, but the general public have very little understanding of a soul. They probably understand the word spirit, they hear the word soul, but they do not realize what that might mean and what place that might have in their life as the soul that's inhabiting that body. And the ETs are very adept at doing things with consciousness, and the soul is about consciousness. So this creates this enhanced human awareness in the soul that's been incarnated in a body, or consciousness with the ability to tap into the grey consciousness. So often it's very easy for us to get downloads to to immediately begin communicating and fit in on a craft, to be able to tap into the big brain of the craft, tap into the hive mind, etc. And there's a few other aspects that we'll look at now too. So I have been told that this is the first time this dual soul capacity has been taken place with humans on the planet, is within this agenda that's happening now. They do it frequently with other species, and I was shown on one occasion where there was a mantis entity there in the image giving healing, in charge of a healing situation on craft, and he showed me this other part of his soul blending, or his soul, dual soul, moving in and out, moving in a way that I was able to see it taking place. So I watched in awe as the entity's eyes became intense and altered shape, his skull flexed and molded, and his facial features sculpted before my eyes. And he was enabling me to see how he could move into that other identity of the grey identity and back into the mantis, and utilize the knowledge and the wisdom from both of those soul sources that are put together for a specific reason and tasks in this life as a part of this agenda. And as a 14-year-old, I was lying in bed, but was unaware of the call. So I was getting this call to get up, get out of the body and out of the bed, but it was only the grey soul identity, the dual soul part of me, that heard it and responded to that request to accompany two greys on board a craft. And that's the two balls of light floating in the air above the bed. So they were telling the grey side of my consciousness, which is able to manifest in a matter form. Many experiencers describe, and when experiencers and abductees first began describing this, they were ridiculed for it. And that is that they're able to describe stepping out of their body on the craft as a grey and leaving the human body just standing there in the hallway. And I've done that myself. I've walked out of my body as a child, as a teenager, and as an adult, and that body just stays there. And some experiencers describe it like stepping out of your overcoat and leaving it hanging on a hook while you go off and do something in this grey form. Now, we have much to learn. Do we completely understand how this happens? No. I use my toaster every day, but I don't know really how the toaster works. It just does work. It's something I've learned to make work. And it's the same with this. You're equipped with this consciousness, soul capacity before when you incarnate, and that's what you use. That is what is normal to you in life. And I think that this is part of the reason why many experiencers have got themselves into trouble describing things that they can do, perceive, or feel. And people say you can't possibly know that. But this is this dual soul capacity coming into play. Okay, so these dual soul identities may have had past life as an ET, may have had genetic alterations or be hybridized in some way, may have extensive education, which I've mentioned before, and can access the grey consciousness. Okay, so now let's look at the 3 waves, which is a positive agenda for human advancement. And it's about 3 waves of souls that incarnated at specific times onto the planet within this time frame going into the future. And if I was to give a concept or a vision to cover this agenda, it is that the ETs are trying to create change from within. They don't want to come in and take over and control us and tell us what to do. They are trying to help us more rapidly develop as a species and a civilization by giving this massive education to many experiencers, probably hundreds of thousands or millions throughout the world. And it is that flow-on effect from each of those people that brings about these changes, that brings about changes in our institutions and our laws and our medical fields, in our education fields, etc., in our technology. So change from in, creating this enhanced spurt or speed up in our evolution, because they can see what is coming on our planet. They can probably see what is coming in our solar system or in our part of the universe as the universe changes and expands. And we have to be moving with that, or we're going to somehow get left behind and in some kind of state of breakdown and decay, which we can see happening around us now. And I'd first like to say that I have had a few letters or people speak to me at conferences overseas over the years saying that I'm using Dolores Cannon's information on the 3 waves, which is a book that she wrote in 2009. But this is actually not correct. I first spoke about this very tentatively in Sydney, Australia in June 2007 at a conference, and I presented at the end of my speech a very short snippet on the 3 waves of volunteer souls incarnating into the planet. And a copy of my video was given to Dolores Cannon when she also visited Australia a couple of months later. And then straight after Christmas, New Year in 2008, she began talking about this concept in radio shows in the States and put together a book which is largely regressions. She's probably gone through her store of regressions and pulled out things that sound as if they refer to this, and put together a book. So I put this out. Dolores did not know anything about this, and I doubt until she saw my video. So I'm just putting this in here because I've had some flack about this, and it's actually not correct. I put this out long before Dolores wrote her book. Okay, so the 3 waves of volunteer souls. So the first wave is broken into 2 parts, and this is this clever, multi-layered, very complex, multi-layered factors or facet of the ET's agendas and everything that they do. Something can look very simple on a craft, but it can be exceptionally complex. The whole ideology or the whole structure behind it may be very complex. So the first waves of souls that started coming in to help us speed up our evolution for what lies in our future, I have given names to. These waves were described to me back as a child, as an 8-year-old, and then this was reinforced right through into adulthood. And I have given these names that are appropriate for humans to understand. So the first wave came in about 1920s, 1930s, very early, long before, you know, the first sightings of flying saucers took place in the States. And this was the innovators. And this name I've given to them because they were behind many of the early paranormal adventures into the paranormal that took place at that time, with Ouija boards and seances and early healing, intentional healing, and not meditation, but mindfulness, which we are revisiting at this point in time. So they were awakening people to these paranormal or, you know, outside of the box kinds of experiences that people can have. Now, the Enlighteners came much later, so they are more into the 90s, and they are what many researchers call the Star Kids. Well, they've been given lots of names like the Crystal Children and the Indigo Children, etc. And there's quite a few researchers out there pushing the Star Kids as the be-all and end-all. They're going to save the planet, etc. But from my understanding of the 3 waves of volunteer souls, this is not the case. They are here to show us what we can do. So they're quite overt with art and music and drama and crystals and alternative healing. They're free spirits. They're into all of that kind of thing, but they do not have the intense and extensive tasks to perform for humanity coming up in the next 20 years or so that some of that the 3rd wave has. So these ones are out there creating beauty, creating showing us what we can do with telepathy or all these other new age skills, if you can put it that way. And they are continuing into the future. So they've come in at a specific time and they'll continue to be born. The second wave, however, is a finite wave. It's a very large wave of souls coming in from around 1930 to the 1980s, 1990s. It involves the contactees, the abductees, and the experiencers. So we have in here all of those people who've had contact in this way, in this agenda to bring this enlightenment and movement in our evolution about. They are a finite group. All of these many, many souls came in a big lump over a period of time, and then it stopped. It was finite. And there were two groups in there, the pioneers, who are probably the early contactees, and some of the abductees who introduced this idea of contact with alien beings to humanity. The contactees had reported contact with loving, beautiful, peaceful beings, but the abductees began reporting the greys, and because of this terrible fear factor that was associated with this very unusual looking species that did not look human-like, I think they were vilified by the press, they were vilified by many people, the public, etc. And so they had a rough time. They were definitely in the pioneers. The communicators are the second part of the wave, born in roughly in the 40s onwards. And they are the ones today who, like me, I'm in that part of the group, are speakers, writers, make movies, etc., but are coming out with their experiences and attempting to teach people about this contact that's taking place, that it is a reality and that it is here for a positive intent and to change humanity. Now, in saying all of this, I am not putting abductees on the back foot who have had any kind of negative and traumatic experience. As a person who interviews and talks to abductees and experiencers worldwide and works with them, I know that many of those people are traumatized by specific incidents. Now, some of those people eventually come to terms with it and say, well, look, actually, I think it was my own fear that was doing that. And now I've overcome that fear. I'm comfortable with these experiences. But then there are others who report things that are out of the norm for the more loving contact that many pioneers and communicators have had. So there's a lot of talk about this amongst researchers and the public. Is this because there are a variety of species interacting with us, and that the species that are doing this are a species of grey, but they are outside of this particular positive agenda? I don't know. But I certainly give credibility to abductees who have been traumatized by their experiences. It's a very real thing. And the third wave, the implementers came in earlier on, so they are preparing the way through beginning to change some of the what we see as norms on our planet, processes, procedures, and institutions that have operated the same way for a very long time, sometimes hundreds of years, and it's time we changed them and updated them. And then from that particular group is extracted what I call the fourth intellect. So this fourth intellect, as I describe in my book, has four separate factors that they have to meet in their training and in their education craft before they can be called that group. And this particular group of third wavers that are drawn out and called the fourth intellect are the ones who have the most to do in terms of tasks on the planet. You will see many of them coming to the fore in businesses, in institutions, in law, in medicine, in education, in politics, in the environmental groups, etc. You'll see these people who are in their 30s and early 40s coming forward and taking leading roles in that. They will be recognized by the public as very intuitive, very reliable, very conscientious people, very ethical, and having very righteous and very good personalities. And they will lead the way for us to move into this new era. Okay, so that's just the one of the charts I put up in that conference in 2007, showing you that the first wave extends into the future. That second wave is very big but finite, and the third wave is going to extend as well, taking us into the future. Okay, so human advancement and evolution. How are the ETs with these education programs creating that human advancement? How are we being advanced and enhanced and leading towards more evolution? Well, on the craft, they use interspecies psychology and familiarization to get us prepared, get those people who are going on board in this gender prepared for that kind of interaction, should there be open contact with ETs in the future between our civilization and theirs, not on an individual basis or this agenda basis as it is now, but the whole of humanity. And so I guess in a way they are hedging their bets, because as you saw on those charts, the first wave and the third wave go on into the future. They're just going to keep incarnating. Those souls are going to keep incarnating into those agendas, knowing what they're here for and being able to carry it out, so that if we do not reach the speed that they want us to reach, that the ETs have in mind for us, their goal of speeding up our spirituality and our evolution, if we don't reach it, and some of those start to, first and third wavers start to age, then those younger ones are coming on with the same momentum, the same education, and the same commitment. And this is my son on board craft as a baby, bird's eye view, looking down at a white plasticky kind of table that he was lying on with other small babies and ETs of different mixed species, different shaped heads and eyes, and interaction was taking place with them, and he was comfortable with their looks and their frequency and their vibe and their telepathy from a very young age. And here he is. I saw one of the greys leaning over him, communicating with him, and I was told by the grey that there was communication in return. That was surprising to me, because although you have your mother's instinct or intuition, I wasn't receiving any specific messages or impressions from my child, other than knowing that he was hungry or needing to be changed, etc., or was cold, or all of those usual things that you recognize when you're a mother. But the grey was picking up something quite different. So this familiarization with them is taking place in my generation and my son's generation, and then all those other ones coming in the first and third wave into the future. They're also showing us and teaching us the use of advanced medical and healing technologies and methods on board craft. I have been part of groups being taught how to ascertain where there are tumours or illnesses within the body, being able to take my consciousness right into the body, inside muscles, inside blood vessels, etc., taking it in there and traveling along and looking at it. And the first way that I was taught to do this was I was stood in front of a plant on a desk, and I was guided to take my consciousness through the tip of a leaf, down through the leaf and the stem, down into the roots of the plant, and to feel the differences and feel the energy of the plant. And so this was later replicated in healing situations. So many of the people taken on board craft have been exposed to the use of advanced medical and healing technology, which we are just starting to replicate on the planet now. We've also been exposed to advanced light technology and physics, and that's a light elevator that I'm exiting on the left there. I began using that as a child. It has no floor. You have a leap of faith when you first get into one, and you are suspended in this kind of electric light, liquid light, I called it, because that's what it felt like. And you could be transported within different levels of the craft in this. So there's a lot of technology and physics that many experiencers come forward with. And we need more scientists to take notice of this and to talk to us and see what they can glean from it. We're also shown and taught how to use consciousness-assisted technology. That's me on the left, learning to fly a small scout craft, and I'm looking out the window at the view that's outside the craft, or it's actually on a screen, not a window. And on the right-hand side there, that's one of my husband's early attempts at drawing a 3D image of a computer with something elevated outwards from it, very difficult to draw, and learning to how to utilize this technology and to make yourself part of the technology. And you'll see that my left hand is actually in a left-hand image. My left hand is actually on a part of the console that tapped me into the big brain of the craft. And in the other one, my hand is not on a keyboard there. It's just on a pad that connected my electricity or my auric field to their technology. We're also taught about telepathy and interspecies communication. So all sorts of forms of telepathy that the ETs can use. It's quite extraordinary because when we think about telepathy, we think of conveying a thought out there that might reach anyone at all might pick up on it. And we all experience that sometimes when we feel like someone is going to ring us, and then the next minute they do, the phone goes and it's that person. So are we picking up that vibe, that telepathy, that intent by that person to ring you, and we're picking it up? But the ETs can actually exclude anyone they like from a telepathic communication. I call that telepathic exclusion, where I've been in a group of people where they have conveyed information to half the room, but not the other half, because the other half doesn't need that information, or that other half is going to be removed and put in another part of the education program for a specific reason. So they don't need that. It's not, they're not going to clutter their consciousness with that information. So it's very extraordinary what they can do with telepathy, and how their consciousness can react with matter, etc. And teaching us about pure consciousness. So Jeff and I have experienced what we both call the white room, which expanded until you were no longer aware of the floor, but you knew you were standing on something. You could no longer see the walls. It was just a white environment, and there were changes in the forms of matter in front of us and around us. We were encouraged to basically evaporate our body into matter, but the small amount of humans that I was with at that time were not too keen on doing that. They were a bit shocked by it all. But at the same time, we were enveloped in this pure consciousness with the most intense love and joy that you could ever imagine. I've never experienced such love and joy in all of my life. Even though I love my children and my husband and they love me, it just doesn't match what was overwhelmingly evident in that room. And if we could all feel that momentarily on this planet, I don't think our planet would be in the trouble that it is in now. We would be wanting to aspire to that feeling again. They're also helping us, taking us on board craft in this agenda to understand our planet and our environment. And I have been in large lectures where we've been instructed on how we can assist in the years to come and within Earth changes and other severe weather events. But we've also been imbued, if I can put it that way, with this massive commitment to do whatever we can in that respect. And you'll find a lot of experiencers and abductees are involved in the environment, ecology, voluntary services, and all of that kind of thing, planting out native plants and restoring dunes and all that kind of thing that that helps restore our environment to what it may have been once upon a time. And many experiences I know are so overwhelmed and overcome by the state of the planet, and incidentally, might I add, the state of ufology or UFO research, and how much deceit and money making and lack of integrity is often involved in it, that they have left that contact field in droves, and they're doing other things. They're doing the restoring the dunes and you know, recycling and working for other humanitarian groups. The ETs are also helping us to understand our place in the cosmos, that we are not alone, that they are there reaching out to us, and that their desire is that we understand first what we're doing to our planet, and that also involves nuclear warfare and nuclear armament. Their disapproval and disgust of this has been going on for decades and has been conveyed through many researchers, such as Captain Robert Salas, who was in the Air Force at Malmstrom Air Force Base, and witnessed the UFO come down and shut down the Minuteman nuclear missiles. He is an experiencer now, and he talks about his experience and how this is damaging our planet, and the prospect of nuclear war could annihilate us entirely. And this agenda is, this is part of the agenda that they're bringing to our attention, what is destroying us, because without our environment, we will die and we will just disappear. Mother Earth will continue and regenerate herself, but we won't be here to witness it. And so through this process of education, mass consciousness can be influenced positively. A massive shift in humanity's awareness can result from this intervention, and the word agenda is interchangeable with the word intervention. It is an intervention through education. It's not an intervention by the ETs through control, through taking us over, or through telling us what to do. They are simply educating us en masse, going on board the craft as experiencers, abductees, contactees, and they are hoping that the flow-on effect from all of us working the best we can in our own lives to enlighten and wake up other people to the situation and what we can and cannot do about it, and to the fact that the ETs are here. This is what their goal is. So if we look now at what's happening with the revelations coming out of the States, that UAP or UFO are real, the next step is going to be, when they've finished examining the whole nuts and bolts side of it, which everybody used to ridicule decades ago, and I know that as a sighting investigator myself in New Zealand, there's been a lot of ridicule of the nuts and bolts. But the ETs told me years ago, first of all, humanity will have to go through examining the sightings. They will not, in general, be able to skip over the top of that and go straight to contact. It's a step too far. Let them accept that there's these objects in the sky watching us. They're not ours. They've come from somewhere else. Once these simple concepts get into people's minds, then slightly further down the track, we can get them to look at who's flying them, who built them, and what they want, what they're doing, and have they been here before? And if so, what are they doing? And that's when humanity will start to wake up and accept the wider cosmos. Michio Kaku, the theoretical physicist from the States, has talked about how we are not yet a planetary civilization. In other words, we all live on this planet, but we're all fractured and broken up into groups, warring aspects. And until we are able to unite in our commitment to improve our environment and consider these UAP and what they might mean, until we're ready to do that, we're going nowhere. We have not become an interplanetary civilization or beyond that even yet. So are we a danger that we are sending things out into space? Well, if they're taking photos and bringing back some information about our solar system, that's a good thing. But do we want our satellites weaponized? Do we want space weaponized? No. So our understanding and our ethics around nuclear technology and around the way we treat new technology has to change, because at the moment, most of humanity is more, the groups that evolve this technology on the planet want to weaponize it. They want to use it against other members of humanity. They want to monetize it. So these are all negative things to do with power and control. And until we get past this mindset, we're not going anywhere very fast at all. So the ET's hope is that the three waves, the dual soul humans and all of the experiencers and abductees, contactees who've had these experiences are going to broadcast it eventually. But you have to think very carefully about how that is done. Because if you take people too far, too fast, who are not interested in the subject and have never had any contact with the subject before, they will simply switch off. And we all know people who try to do that. They try to push their perspective in conversations, etc. We have to be very careful. I'm speaking to the converted here now, but if I was to speak to a public group, as I do in New Zealand, lots of different community groups, it's very much toned down and softened down and kept reasonably simple and clear and succinct, and throw the facts in there that they can accept. If there's some facts in there, that's always a good thing. So there ends my speech for today, and I'm happy to answer questions now if you would like. Thank you.